Digimon Survive looked like it might never release. This game utilizes a different engine and was made by a different development studio than we were originally told back in 2018. The only thing that seemingly hasn't changed was the game's core idea, a visual novel experience with tactical combat and a real focus on a dark story. Releasing on the 29th of July 2022, copies of this title are available on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Switch and PC. With cautious optimism, I played Digimon Survive knowing all of the above. I'm not really into visual novels as a gameplay concept, but I did know that that's what this was going in. There were more than enough articles, videos, screenshots, including Bandai's own gameplay footage trailer, that ignorance to this fact is not a justifiable reason to flag the game as bad from the start. However, this design choice did cement one thing. From the word go, Digimon Survive was putting a lot of faith in its story and characters. Even by my most generous estimate, which includes some serious grinding, this game was around 35 hours long on a single playthrough. Around 70% of that is spent looking at a storyboard, reading text, or listening to audio and making choices. The other 30% is the turn-based tactical battling that feels a lot like Fire Emblem. This puts a lot at the feet of Takuma and his friends to carry the game, and when the credits did finally roll, I feel justified saying that the word survive does not sit in this game's title unnecessarily. I also think it's fair to say that this story takes a lot of inspiration, structurally, from the Digimon anime, particularly Digimon Adventures 1 and 2. The characters here are all modernizations of those characters, a group of teenagers who are unwittingly whisked away to the digital world. Survive's contemporary take on this concept takes advantage of the societal changes that have taken place since 1999. This game puts a greater focus on considerations like mental health, emotional well-being, and past traumas to create an almost sinister overture at times. For large portions of this gameplay experience, the greatest threat is not bad Digimon, rather just the active displacement from reality and what that does to a person's psyche. This does make the game quite accessible outside of just fans of this franchise, because the primary focus here is less on the monsters, who function more as a conduit to drive the narrative. Instead, this is mostly about the teenagers who've been stranded and how they interact with each other and try to make it out to the other side with their lives and sanity intact. The game does seem to acknowledge this in the writing as well. Words like Digimon and Digivolution aren't used here and are instead replaced with more generic terms that are perhaps more fitting to someone who is a Digimon outsider. This contributes to a massive change in tone for the series. While Digimon games have always covered a handful of genres, from turn-based dungeon crawling to the best modernization of the Tamagotchi you can get for a home console, these games did not push the same value onto the story that this game does. The most noticeable of these is Takuma, the protagonist for this game. We often hear his inner thoughts, but his decisions are our decisions, and these have an impact on his overall moral leaning. In short, this is a cumulative value of the decisions you've made in the game, and hinges on three main tenets: moral, harmony, and wrathful. These affect which evolution tree his partner Digimon Agumon has access to, as well as affecting certain story choices. These values are changed during the visual novel side of the game, where you interact with objects within a static area. These can lead to new items, new battles, or new conversations with your friends. There are also elements of these where you have to use Takuma's phone to pinpoint a disturbance in the environment, and these can lead to random encounters, among other things. Entirely separate from this, there is the combat. This takes place on a grid and sees you deploy your partner Digimon, along with any wild Digimon that you become friends with, to take part in strategic encounters. These are not always just defeat all enemies, but that's the most common task that's asked of you. Unlike other games that feature this style of combat, you don't really have many side objectives aside from looting optional chests, and the only way you can better yourself outside of story points are to use the generic free battles. These are useful in helping you recruit free Digimon to your team, and you can also use them to farm items and Digivolution items at certain points. Outside of free battles, almost every other combat encounter is part of the main plot. This does help Survive keep a firm hand on its pacing, but that does mean that if you're not invested in these characters or interested in the story, the delivery of these moments and how they're spaced out can feel like a chore. Similarly, while fighting is important, and mastering this combat system is advised, the place where the biggest consequences occur is within the visual novel side of the game. Simply put, a wrong decision in battle can lead to losing one of your Digimon, but they are only gone until the end of that encounter, provided you meet the other criteria to win. However, a poor decision in the visual novel side could mess up something big and cause irreparable consequences down the line. That said, there are a few times where it doesn't really matter which option you pick, because you're forced into specific directions regardless. That's not to say these choices don't matter. Most of them actually have an effect on how each of the other characters feel about you or Takuma. These can lead to events happening or not happening at certain points in the future, so there is a bit of an emphasis on making the right choice, or at least the choice you want to make if you're aiming for a specific ending. I really liked the story here, as it absolutely took no prisoners, and it feels a lot like a Danganronpa title rather than something based on the TV show I watched when I was 8. I don't know how much replay value there's going to be here, because you'll have seen a lot, if not all of the things you want to the first time around, and the shocks and surprises this game does deliver aren't easily repeatable. This game does get a lot right. There's an RPG customization system for each monster, but it's not overwhelming. You can equip 2 pieces of gear and use your party members to gain temporary buffs in combat. Special items can be used to improve the base stats of your creatures permanently, and healing and stats recovery items can be used in battle. Digimon typing follows the rock, paper, scissors style of vaccine, virus, and data, and then takes into consideration elemental resistances and weaknesses. The tactical grid side of combat mostly focuses on unit orientation, with the maximum damage being dealt to the rear of a unit, while attacking head-on will deal the least. This is not particularly deep or complex, and the auto battle is quite competent if you're mostly here for the story. That said, combat is good, it's solid, and if you like Fire Emblem style games, this is definitely something I'd consider looking into. On a technical level, this game had no issues outside of some localization mistakes and missing words. There was also a time when the text referred to a Biomon as a Patamon, and a few occasions where the on-screen text and voice lines didn't match up quite right. Mostly, this was very competent. One of the best things about the game is that it seems to have been well designed for laptops as well. The control layout on PC favors using keyboard-only input, rather than expecting you to have at all times a mouse as well as a keyboard. In conclusion, Digimon Survive's slow pacing might put a lot of people off, but this isn't a fault of the game. That's part of the visual novel experience, and it's up to you as a player whether or not this genre is for you. If, like myself, you're not really into visual novels, but you're a Digimon fan, this is a coin flip. I found the story to be well written, and while structurally it's not original, even within the Digimon franchise, I do believe that this is a good game as a result of that story. Bandai announced upon launch they want the community to respect a 2-month spoiler window, where no content from after Part 5 is shown. It says a lot about where I feel the value in this title lies, that I intend to respect that here. The value of this game is so heavily weighted on these story moments that spoiling any of them does defeat this game's primary selling point. I wouldn't have wanted this spoiling for me, and I won't do that to anyone here. I'd be lying if I said Survive was everything I wanted in a Digimon game, because I never envisioned this being the direction the franchise would go down. One thing I value a lot is how the Digimon franchise is open to experimenting, rather than endlessly churning out a copy and paste of the same game with slightly better graphics and new monsters. Survive does right the most difficult thing for any franchise that has more than 20 years of history. It respects the memories that the original fans from the 90s have, while paving the way for new ones. Survive's entire premise relies on actions having consequences, and as such this is not for the faint of heart, or those looking for a warm-hearted tale about a child who knows only optimism and fuzzy adventures with creatures. This game is about a genuine struggle for survival, and now that I've experienced it, I've never been more confident that this was the right move for this franchise.